Welcome and good afternoon. This is Commish Orr, and today we are going to do the final how to play video for season ticket baseball. I pretty much wrapped things up with parts 1 and 2, but the one thing I did not cover in those parts is season play. And there are several rules around season play, including what we'll talk about today. I did cover injuries before, but I'm going to go a little bit more into injuries and recovery, talk about pitchers and days of rest, and then talk about what happens when you try to play players more than they played in real life, and some of the rules around that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As always, you can follow the projects I have going on over at baseballmaelstrom.com. I have two current projects. One is a Payoff Pitch Hall of Fame League, and one is a season ticket baseball best of the 90s tournament currently, and we are getting close to the World Series in the best of the 90s tournament, so check that out as well. You can find all of those stats and everything from all the projects I've done over there at baseballmaelstrom.com. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about season ticket baseball and season play, or I don't know if they call it. Did they call it season play? I think they call it season play. Let's see. Season play. Yeah, they call it season play. Okay. But before we head into that, let's talk about injuries a little bit. I did cover injuries before, but I didn't go into injury recovery, talk about concussions and that kind of thing, and batting helmets and so forth. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about injuries because it does impact season play, and then we'll talk about the rest. Now, I understand if you are doing as played lineups, then this does not apply to you, and this video probably doesn't apply to you very much. Or if you're just doing one-off projects and you don't really play with injuries, or you don't really care about days of rest for pitchers and that kind of thing, then again, you probably won't use these rules. And that's why I didn't really cover these in the first two parts, because my guess is that this only applies to a very, very small subset of people that actually play with these rules. It just so happens I'm one of them. So I tend to play projects, not season play. So I'm not using as played lineups or as played pitchers or any of that. I've never really been into that kind of project. Likewise, I don't usually play just one-off games here or there. That has never appealed to me either. So for example, my current project is the best of the 90s tournament, and I'm doing it as if it were a real schedule instead of having it be a self-contained tournament where you just play each round and don't really worry about continuing injuries and that thing into the next rounds and stuff like that. I'm actually playing it as if it were a real scheduled tournament. Just to give you an idea, here's the schedule. And you can see we started in September 1st, 2024 is the quote real date that I started on. And then I have off days built in just like it were real playoff games and that kind of thing. So you can see that I've basically scheduled this out so that I know what days games are taking place. And because of that, it's really interested me to see how deep certain teams are, so that I play with injuries and I play with actual pitcher usage rules and that kind of thing to make sure pitchers can't start on however many days rest unless it was historically accurate and that kind of thing. I'll even go so far in my projects to make sure that in the earlier times, not modern day, but in the earlier times, you'd have pitchers go more than 9 innings. If, let's say, if both pitchers a game was tied 1-1, you might have pitchers go 10 or 11 innings not that long ago. Again, not in modern times, but not that long ago, you'd have pitchers go that long. But before I would allow a pitcher to do that, I would check their historical stats for the season to see if they actually pitched 10 innings in that particular season before I would actually do that. Anyway, all that is to say that in the way I play, I do take injuries into account, and I do take pitcher usage into account. So all the season play aspects I do play with. So there may be a few of you out there like that, and this video is really for you. So I'm going to use, as I have in the past, a couple of example players. I'm going to have, let's say, Mark McGwire. I'm going to have Dave Henderson, and I'm going to have Willie McGee, I believe. Willie McGee. Just to give you a couple of examples. And because I'm doing best of the 90s and Oakland, the 1990 Oakland Athletics are still left, this is one of the teams I've been dealing with. And actually this came up because both Willie McGee and Dave Henderson got injured in the same game. So what happens when you come upon a rare play that leads to an injury is you go through a process where you look to see how many games they played that year. That's going to give you a roll modifier. So if they played fewer games, they have a higher roll modifier, which means they're going to be injured for longer. That's to simulate players that did not play that much in the season, maybe because they were injured in real life, or maybe just because they didn't really get many games in. So you have Mark McGwire, who played 156 games. His roll modifier would only be +5. Then you have Dave Henderson. And Dave Henderson played 127 games, so his roll modifier would be +15. And then you have Willie McGee. Willie McGee only played 29 games that year, so his roll modifier is +35. You look in the column. Now, before 1962, they only played 154 games, so you would use this column. Likewise, in strike-shortened seasons, 94, 80, 81. In strike shortened seasons, you kind of have to do what I do is I do a percentage, like how many games did the player play divided by the number of games the team played that year. That gives you a percentage. Multiply that percentage times 162, and that'll give you the equivalent number of 162 games that you can use on this chart. For pitchers, you go by the games started if it's a starting pitcher, or games pitched if it's a reliever, to give you appropriate modifiers. And then once you have the modifiers, and we're just going to do one for each of these players. Let's start with Willie McGee. We'll go Willie McGee first. 29. He has a +35. And so let's pull up the little dice roller here. And you roll all 3 dice. Oh, that's good. 1, 0, 2. That's 3. You add them together. 3. You add that to the roll modifier. So you had a +35. That's a 38. And then you consult the appropriate chart based on what type of injury it was. They have batting injuries, collision injuries, hit by pitch injuries, pitching or throwing, running or fielding, or sliding. And each of these has a different injury chart for days injured. Let's just use, I'm just going to use the hit by pitch chart. And if we go down the hit by pitch chart, this is line drives too. And we had 35 plus 3, that's 38. Hairline wrist fracture, he's injured 30 days. So this is in addition to today's game. So if it happened in today's game, he's coming out of today's game. And he's injured an additional 30 days. It doesn't say 30 games, it says 30 days. That's why, again, this is good for people using actual schedules or have built out actual schedules with off days and so forth, because if there are off days in there, those count for days, even though the team didn't play those days. So 30 days for him. Let's do another example with Dave Henderson. So Dave Henderson's roll modifier was, what did we say? +15. +15. Yeah, +15. And so we roll. 17 plus 15 is 32. And we're going to use hit by pitch again. 32. Bruised ribs, 6 days. So not as bad. And then we had Mark McGwire, which was a +5. 3, 4. 4 plus 5 is a 9. Bruised skin, no days. So he comes out of the current game, but he is not injured for longer than that. So there you go. Pretty easy. A couple things to keep in mind that are talked about here is batting helmets. So if the injury is marked with an asterisk, then assuming the player was wearing a batting helmet, then those injuries are reduced to mild concussion if it's a head injury. So because of the batting helmet, it alleviated the getting hit in the head type of thing. And this makes a note. The first batting helmet was worn in 1940. Before that date, so if anything before August 22nd, 1940, you can assume the players are not wearing helmets. After that day, then you could roll 2 10-sided dice, add to the current year, and if it's equal to or more than 1955, the player's wearing a helmet. And that's to simulate the fact that not everybody just started wearing helmets in 1940. It was kind of phased in, if you will. So not everybody wore them, but as time went on, more and more players started wearing them. So that's how you can kind of simulate that. So if we go down to where the asterisks are, and these are going to mostly be the hit by pitches, we can see lacerated eye. That would not be a head injury. So that one would be totally saved by the batting helmet. There would be no injury from that because of the batting helmet. We have broken cheekbone. We have fractured eye bone. We have skull fracture. So skull fracture, let's say, that's a very serious injury. 90 days. But in days of batting helmets, that would become a mild concussion instead of a skull fracture. Same with fractured eye bone. I believe, is it just the head injuries? Reduce these head injuries, okay, to mild concussion. Okay, so I don't know that I would. Oh, I probably would, I guess. So to me, lacerated eye would not result in a mild concussion, personally. But I'd say broken cheekbone, fractured eye bone, skull fracture, those I would probably say are stopped by the batting helmet and result in the concussion. Broken jaw, any of the more severe ones, I don't know that I would say the lacerated eye would be. But regardless, if you get one of those results and they're wearing a batting helmet, which modern day they would be, those are instead considered concussions. And starting in 2011, Major League Baseball requires all players who suffer concussion to be placed on the 7-day disabled list. So, and the same applies to mild concussion results. So you may see, for example, here in the collision table, mild concussion, 2 days. Well, after 2011, it's not going to be 2 days, it's going to be 7 because they enter the concussion protocol. So just something to keep in mind. Those mild concussions become 7 days because of the concussion protocol. Now, there's a moderate concussion down here that's 20. That one wouldn't change because that's already more than the 7-day minimum. So these other hit by pitches, though, so a skull fracture, which would have been 90 days, if they had been wearing a batting helmet, that would change into a mild concussion 7 days. They'd still miss time, but not as much. So that's how concussions work and batting helmets. It's very determined based on the year that you're playing. And the concussion protocol only went into place in 2011. So if you're playing prior to 2011, but after 1940, and they're wearing a batting helmet, then the batting helmet is removing their injury altogether, I guess. It doesn't really say, or I don't really remember it saying, that there's any modification injuries other than those two rules. So injury recovery. As it says, players are going to miss the number of days listed on the chart. However, you can bring back players earlier than stated. Okay, and maybe you're thinking this yourself. You're thinking, my player has a pulled hamstring, 2-day injury, or my player has bruised ribs, 1-day injury. a lot of players play through that kind of thing and they don't miss time, right? They don't always miss time, I should say. Well, I don't know of another game that does this, honestly, but Season Ticket Baseball does this. It actually has rules for how to play players while they're still hurt. So every day the player rests, you reduce the number of days left by 1. Okay? And by rest, it means he does not play. So he gets a day of rest if he does not play. And once the number gets down to 5 or less, you can have that player play hurt. So that's to simulate the fact that if it's more than 5 days, they're just too injured to try to play. But once they get down to within 5 days of removing the injury, they can play hurt. And so you may have a good player, a really good player, and maybe you want to have him come off the bench and pitch hit or whatever it may be. Then you can actually do that, even though they're still injured before their injury time is up. Again, this happens in real life all the time. And so if they have 5 or fewer days left in the recovery, you apply certain penalties based on how many days they have left. So let's in our example, let's just assume it is, let's go with broken nose. 2 days. Broken nose, 2 days. Okay, so every day that they play, you subtract from their ratings. So you subtract 1 from each of the players' ratings for every day of recovery they have left. So if it's 2 days, you'd subtract 2 from each of the players' ratings. And that's all of their ratings. That's their speed, that's their stealing, that's their defensive ratings, that's their power, that's everything. For pitchers, they get a level of fatigue whenever they enter the game and they have an injury. They have that fatigue that they start out with. So pitcher has a broken nose. It's 2 days. He's going to start with 2 levels of fatigue from the time he comes into the game. It doesn't affect their stamina, but it affects their fatigue. So that means you're going to add 20 to all those 600 or higher rolls because it's 10 per level of fatigue. For batters, in addition to the -1 per day of injury to all their ratings, you're going to subtract 10 for every day of injury for rolls below 200. So the rolls are below 200. It's 150, let's say. That would become a 130 instead of a 150. And if this reduces the roll below 100, then it's a strikeout and the batter gets a batting injury. So let's say you roll a 107 and you have 2 days. Well, -20 takes you below 100. So it's going to be a strikeout plus there's going to be another injury. There's going to be a batting injury that the player suffered also. So you run the risk. When you play injured, you run the risk of another injury. Likewise, number 4 here says you add 5 to any rolls on the injury table. So if there are 2 days of injury left, or 2 days of recovery left, then you would add 10 to the injury table on top of the numbers you started with. So Willie McGee, which was a +35, he would be a +45 if he played injured. Mark McGwire, who was a +5, would be a +15. So if the player has multiple injuries, all of these penalties apply per injury. So let's say you had a player that had a broken nose, that's 2 days, and he has a bruised foot also. That's another day for a bruised foot. That'd be 3 days of recovery combined that you would apply to all of these 4 things. So all of those penalties get added up. And they kind of walk through an example. Kirk Gibson in 1988. They give you a little example of Kirk Gibson. Remember, he played injured. He came in and had that clutch homer. He had that clutch home run in the bottom of the 9th of the World Series where he was injured. He came in hobbling, right? Well, kind of walks you through what that would look like. So yeah, that's how you would determine the what happens. And then finally, when you complete, so we had a player with a broken nose, 2 days, right? Once they play in that game, then if they play in more than 5 innings, 5 or more innings, excuse me, you, instead of subtracting 1 day from the injury or keeping it level, you would add 1 to the number of days remaining. So the 2 becomes a 3 days of rest needed because they played injured. So it extended their injury time. It extended their injury time. So that's the other bad thing, is it extends their injury time. But if you need to bring somebody in, you need to bring somebody in. And that's if they play 5 or more innings. So if they come in and pinch hit, that's not going to add to their injury time, but it's not also going to subtract a day from their injury time. Their days aren't going to get shorter. Their days are not going to get shorter. Let's see here. Yes. So as it says, their days only get shorter if they do not play. If they come in and pinch hit even, their injury time does not get shorter. It doesn't. You don't remove a day. If they play 5 or more innings, not only do you not remove a day, but you add another day to the injury recovery. So that's how injury recovery works. And again, very detailed injury charts here based on what type of injury it was, the severity, the length of time based on playing time. In fact, Willie McGee just got injured for the rest of the season, or the rest of the tournament, I should say, because he only played 20 whatever games in the regular season for Oakland. In fact, one thing you might want to check on is players that played for multiple teams in a certain year. You probably want to combine their teams, because you don't want to penalize them just because they only played 20 games for one team, but they actually played a full season, but they only played 20 games for that particular team because they got traded or whatever. And that's something I should have done. I should have looked up here and seen that in actuality, Willie McGee played 154 games, or excuse me, 154 games in 1990. Yeah, he played 29 for Oakland, but he played 154 total that year. So you're getting me live now, just realizing that. Just realizing that live. So he got traded at some point in the season between St. Louis and Oakland, and that's why he only had 29 games for Oakland, right? So, note to myself to go and change that. Anyway, so there you have injuries. Let's talk about injuries caused by overuse. So this is another example of things. If you're trying to do a season replay and you want to make sure players play a realistic number of games, you don't want to abuse the player that came in September, got called up in September, and he went on a tear, and it isn't really indicative of his actual ability. Which, the funny thing is, I'm thinking of Shane Spencer. Remember 1998, Shane Spencer? He only played 27 games, came up for 67 at-bats, and he hit 10 homers. 10 home runs. He hit 373 with 10 home runs in 67 at-bats. Now, if we played Shane Spencer every day, he would hit a ton of home runs. But that wouldn't be very realistic because he only played 27 games in real life. So, this chart prevents you from overusing players. So, you look at the number of games played on this chart, and it shows you how many consecutive games a player can play. And if they play that number of consecutive games, they trigger a fatigue-related injury. Okay, so when counting consecutive games, it's 5 or more innings, like we talked about before. So it doesn't count fewer than 5 innings, doesn't count as a game, but doesn't count as a day off either. Okay, so it doesn't reset the clock, but it doesn't add 1 to the number of consecutive games played. If If they play in 5 or more innings of both games of a doubleheader, that counts as 5 games. So that's a very steep penalty if they play 2 games of a doubleheader. And then if a player has a full day of rest, then it sets the clock down or the countdown back to 0. Okay, so Shane Spencer here, 27 games, which is less than 81. 1 game. 1 game. So he can't play, if he even plays 1 full game, he'll have a minor injury, fatigue-related injury, that will prevent him from playing more than that. 90, yeah, so keep that in mind. That's the Shane Spencer right there. Now, let's look at Dave Henderson. Dave Henderson played 127. So for him, he could play 3 consecutive games. 3 consecutive games. And if he got a day off, that would reset the clock. So that would be how that would work for him. You can see players, let's say Mark McGwire, what did he have? 154? 156? He could play 15 consecutive games before it would trigger this injury, fatigue-related injury. So at the end of the game in which the player reaches that game limit, they have a 1-day fatigue injury. And it's just like a normal 1-day injury. So it's going to subtract 1 from all their ratings, remember, if they continue to play. If they play with that 1-day injury, remember, they play hurt, in other words. Remember that they get that -1 to all their ratings, plus it worsens to a 2-day injury, remember, because we add 1. If they get a day off, that resets the clock, and they're fine again. So this prevents you from overusing players. Okay? That helps you from overusing players. Now, it doesn't apply to pitchers. They have their own mechanisms for this kind of thing. It doesn't apply to pitchers. It only applies to non-pitchers. So that's how that would work. Again, if you're playing a regular schedule, you'll have days off in there that will reset the clock normally. So like in my tournament, the most the team is playing is maybe 3 or 4 games back to back. So in most cases, the clock's getting reset on those players. It's getting reset because of the days off. And there's a chart here for the shortened seasons. Much like if you're playing before 1962 and there was only a 152 game season, you would use this chart. If you're playing these strike shortened seasons or shortened seasons, you'd look at these charts. Yeah, I was right. 1981, 1994, 1995, 2020. Those are the shortened seasons because of either strike or pandemic. So you would look at these number of games played to determine how many consecutive games the player can play. Likewise, if a player played less than half a season, so Shane Spencer, right? Let's go back to the Shane Spencer. 27 games, right? Then we are going to look at this part-time players chart. A player who played less than half of a season, he gets that 1-day fatigue-related injury immediately after any game in which they play. And it rises in severity for players with less playing time. So 27, we'd look at games played, 27, and we'd see 4 days. So if Shane Spencer plays in a game, he has a 4-day injury afterwards because of fatigue. It's not real fatigue. It's just to simulate the fact that it's not going to let you use him every day. So in that way, he's going to be prevented from, he's going to play maybe once every 5 days at the most, right? That's just in there to prevent you from overusing him. So every time he plays, he's going to have a 4-day injury afterwards because he only played 27 games that season. And that's for these part-time players to make sure you're not overusing them. Again, I think it's a really good system. Let's talk about other season play stuff. Pitchers are the other thing that come up because if you're playing with season play, and I'm going to pull up Andy Pettit and I pull up Dave Stewart. We have the Oakland pitcher and we have a Yankees pitcher here. And so what happens is when the pitcher leaves the game, their fatigue level remains the same as it was in the game, except that something called workload happens. So you can use this chart to determine what their fatigue level is after the game. And if they pitch more than 5 or more innings, their fatigue level is at least going to be 5. So the fatigue level is at least going to be the number of innings they pitched. Or it's going to be the fatigue level they reached in the game, whichever is higher. So if they pitched 6 innings, let's say, and their fatigue level got to 3 during the game, their workload would be 5. It's only if they really had a lot of fatigue buildup, more than 5 fatigue buildup, that you start getting the higher numbers. But in most cases, you're not going to have a pitcher pitch with that kind of fatigue unless you really leave them in more than normal. All right, so this is what you'd use, this little chart here. This is the number of different innings in which the pitcher pitched that day, not innings pitched, the pitching statistic. So if a reliever comes in and they get 1 1/3 inning, okay, but that was spread over 2 innings, their innings would be 2. It's how many innings they appeared in, not how many innings pitched. Okay, it's not calculated based on number of outs, right? So you cross-reference this, that tells you what the workload is. So most starters are going to have a workload of 5 when they leave the game, if they pitch 5 or more innings. And the workload is how many days they have to rest, basically, before they can pitch again. Now, you may think, modern-day starters, 5-man rotation, they don't have 5 days off. Well, that's correct. Because when they go to sleep that night, the number drops by 1. So when they go to sleep the night they pitch, it becomes 4. So they only have 4 days of rest in between for modern pitchers, let's say. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. This number goes down at night when they sleep. That's how it's counted. So it starts at 5 right after they get done pitching. And that's because if they try to pitch a doubleheader, let's say, their workload's already going to be 5 when they start pitching that doubleheader. It doesn't drop by 1 until they go to sleep that night. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind with Andy Pettit and Dave Stewart here. You can pitch on short rest, and that's something I wanted to mention when we're looking at these two pitchers. So we know that some pitchers pitch more than on 4 days rest, let's say. They can pitch on short rest. And so if a pitcher has more than 32 starts, they can make some starts with only 3 days rest. So Andy Pettit had 32 games started. He is not going to be able to pitch on 3 days rest normally. However, Dave Stewart pitched 36. He had 36 games started, so he could possibly. And what you do is you subtract 32 from this number. So 36 minus 32 is 4. And then what you would do is when he has a workload of 5, which is usually right after he gets done pitching, he's going to have a workload of 5. You roll a 10-sided die. And if the 10-sided die is less than their short rest factor, then their workload gets reduced to 4. So they get their workload gets shortened today. And remember, it's going to go down by 1 the night they pitch. So this 4 becomes a 3 the night they pitch. So they only have 3 days off until they can pitch again. So in Stewart's case, 36 minus 32 is a 4. If you roll a 0, 1, 2, or 3, remember zeros are 0, not 10, then he'll be able to pitch on 3 days rest. Now this says to do it when their workload's 5. I usually do it right before they would pitch, and the day they would potentially start on 3 days rest. That's when I usually roll, just because I'm not going to remember necessarily by the time their spot in the rotation comes up. So what I usually do is, like Dave Stewart, once he has 3 days of rest, I'm going to roll. And if it's less than 4, then he'll start that day. That's how I usually do it. But that's how you would factor that in. Now, much like players playing injured, pitchers can pitch while still fatigued. So even though Andy Pettitte cannot pitch on 3 days rest normally, let's say it's the playoffs. The playoffs, you want him to pitch on 3 days rest because it's the playoffs. Then when they enter the game, before their fatigue's been returned to zero, they start the appearance with whatever fatigue level they're at. So if he plays on 3 days rest, and remember, he had a 5 when he left his last start, a 4 when he went to sleep that night. So he'll have a 1 fatigue probably on that 3 days rest game. He'll enter with a fatigue level of 1 already from the start. It doesn't change their stamina, but he's going to have 1 level of fatigue from the start of the game. So that's how workload is determined. Use a little chart. And again, much like anything else, you can bring in a pitcher to pitch before his workload is dropped to 0. You can bring him in earlier than that. He just has that level of fatigue still that he'll have to contend with during the game. So here you see, at the start of each day, before any games are played, reduce the pitcher's fatigue by 1. This occurs regardless of whether the pitch is used that day. So it occurs during the night when the pitcher is sleeping. That's how I always think of it. So there you go. That is pitcher season play and how you reduce that and how you determine that stuff. So those are the season play things to keep in mind. Last thing I'll mention, and again, this doesn't have to do with season play, but just general odds. If you scroll all the way down to page 41 of the rules, you can actually see what, actually page 40, you can actually see what some of these ratings relate to, even though some of them you really don't, like a pitcher's stuff doesn't really come up. But it's a good overall rating of their effectiveness, even though you don't use it in the game itself. Likewise, there's a little chart here on Playing the Odds that shows you the player's rating compared to the opponent's rating. And if you're challenging an outfielder's arm, if your speed is equal to the outfielder's arm rating, if the numbers are equal, it's a 75% chance of success, approximate. If the ratings are equal, but you can use this little chart to see what the benefits are if your rating is higher or lower than the opponent's rating. You get a good quick snapshot. Well, there you have it. A much shorter video, but I just wanted to go over season play because it's not something that probably a lot of people use, but those of you that do, there are rules for it, and I like the fact that you can play players injured. You can have pitchers start on short rest. There are mechanisms in the game to account for all of that. And I think the rules are pretty good, actually. They're good at simulating that stuff. They're good at allowing you to do that in a realistic way. It feels realistic. And again, for those of you who are not playing season replay, or as played lineups or one-time projects, one-off projects, this is a good way to simulate a season for players, the wear and tear that they face through the course of a long season with off days and all of that stuff. So that's where we will leave things. Hopefully you find that being interesting. This will be the last of the How to Play Season Ticket Baseball videos. Again, if you're interested in Season Ticket Baseball, my Best of the 90s tournament is getting close to the World Series. And let's look at the bracket. You will see that already Atlanta is in the World Series from the National League. So representing the National League for the 1990s is the 1998 Atlanta Braves. Facing them will either be the 1990 Oakland Athletics or the 1998 New York Yankees. The Yankees currently have a 2-0 series lead in a best-of-7 series with Oakland to win the American League championship. Very exciting stuff. They fought their way back through the losers bracket after Oakland beat them 3-1 earlier to knock them down to the losers bracket. It's been a very exciting series. You can get all the write-ups and everything on baseballmaelstrom.com. You can see a write-up of every game, along with box scores and score sheets and all that stuff. But that's where we will leave things today. Thank you so much for all the support. Keep those questions coming. If you'd like to see videos on anything else, let me know down in the comments. And until next time, have a great evening.